Hello and welcome to the Forward Unto Dawn podcast, the show all about exploring the fiction of the Halo universe. I'm David, and I'm joined by my co-host Dani.
Hello.
And this episode, our year in review show, we have two guests who coincidentally you previously heard back on episode 20, our last year in review episode. So it's great to welcome back Dildev.
Hello.
And Defguru.
Adios. That work?
Reference acknowledged. For this second Council of D's to talk about Halo in 2017.
Council of D's, please. Come on, don't make it easy for me.
So compared to 2016, I'd say the Halo world was a bit quieter. 2015 was busy because Halo 5 came out. 2016 seemed like it was quieter the first half of the year, and then everything came in a torrential rain storm at the end of the year. And then this year there was less and it was sort of spread out. I guess we'll start asking what everyone was doing in their year of Halo at a high level.
Well, obviously, probably the high points for me were both Legacy of Onyx and Envoy. I thought that those were both fantastic reads, especially Envoy. It might be my second favorite Halo book. So.
After which?
Oh, Shadow of Intent. Shadow of Intent's fantastic, but we're not talking about that today.
And you, Defguru?
I mean, honestly, getting to play the sequel to Halo Wars wetted quite a bit of my whistles, and I loved the expansion, Awakening the Nightmare, maybe a little more story-wise than the first one. Maybe it's just because I really liked Pavium and Vortis. Book-wise, Retribution has been my highlight of the year, probably of the last couple of years, honestly.
And Dani?
I think my year in review is slightly different than the rest of you, because this is the year I've played less Halo than every other year. I read less Halo, and didn't play Halo Wars. Had zero interest in it. The books put me to sleep. Comics aren't doing it for me, and I haven't touched Halo 5 since I can't even remember. That's my year in review.
Thanks for reporting in from the land of salt.
Gotta have a negative Nancy somewhere.
I'm a Jill, not Nancy, okay?
Okay. So for me, I played and read everything.
Brag about it.
No, not bragging. Just I've got the time. But I guess starting in, we started in February with Halo Wars 2, and that was the game release for this year. And like Defguru, I guess I was really excited about it. I enjoyed it. I definitely think we had our review, which we'll post a link in the show notes. I think the story was, for a lot of people, like a big step forward. They liked, we're getting classic Halo vehicles and return to an art style that's closer to Bungie's stuff. They liked following up on the Spirit of Fire, returning to the Arc. I was actually I liked the base game. I think Awakening the Nightmare was much better, both in terms of the short little story it told and also just being a more enjoyable, varied RTS game. I quite enjoyed it, and I liked that there was the drip feed of leaders that made it more engaging gameplay-wise throughout the year. Dildev, did you end up playing Halo Wars 2? Because I know you had started on Halo Wars 1 last year.
I did. I did play through Halo Wars 2. I did not play through Awakening the Nightmare, but I watched a playthrough online. So.
Yes.
I got the story.
If you don't want to pay the money, you can just watch people play it on YouTube now.
I really enjoyed both Halo Wars 2, the base game, and Awakening the Nightmare. Again, even though I didn't get to play it. The gameplay for Halo Wars 2, the base, was a lot of fun. I felt, comparable to the first Halo Wars. The story I felt was slightly different. In its focus, I felt Halo Wars, the first one, was better structured as a plot, but Halo Wars 2 gave us more character depth, and so I really enjoyed that. The writing in terms of plot wise wasn't as tight, but the characters felt more memorable to me in Halo Wars 2 as opposed to the first one.
Yeah. I think Halo Wars 1 in many ways feels like a relic of old Halo in a lot of ways, in that it has very stock characters in a lot of ways. You've got your Cortana-like character, you've got your gruff military characters, you've got a situation where the ragtag UNSC force has to blow up a Forerunner artifact to keep it from the Covenant's hands.
I think you can summarize it by saying they wrote a book where the antagonist's entire motivation was anger at humanity for blowing up Forerunner stuff. So,
well, that is true.
Which is really ironic because in Contact Harvest, they were being blamed for blowing up Forerunner stuff, but they weren't actually blowing up Forerunner stuff. That was the excuse used by the hierarchs in order to create the war. But then the war started, and then humanity did start blowing up.
Hashtag the prophets were right.
Yeah, I guess they were prophetic.
Okay, so we got Halo Wars, and that went through all the way to September as Awaken the Nightmare. So that was a big chunk of the year. And then in April, we got our first novel, which was Envoy, Halo Envoy from Tobias Buckale.
Yep.
Which we covered a little in episode 21 of the podcast. And so you really like this, Dildev. Explain why. Tell us.
Explain why. Well, one, I really enjoyed the short story in Fracture's Oasis that led up to it. I thought that did a really good job of setting the scene of the kind of situation, the tension in the joint occupation zone. And my favorite part of Halo has got to be the post-war interspecies kind of political tension. That's kind of my favorite thing. That's my jam. And so I was always really interested in what went into the joint occupation zone. Like what did it look like with humans and Sangheili interacting? So already just on the basis of the premise, I was excited to go in and see it, and read about what the structure was like. And then additionally, I was kind of expecting it to have a pacing more like the Kilo 5 trilogy. Because the Kilo 5 trilogy, being in the post-war landscape, has this... It's kind of in this... on the brink of crap hitting the fan. You know, they haven't reached it, and so the Kilo 5 folks are trying to make sure that when the crap hits the fan, because they believe that it will hit the Sangheili instead of the UNSC, or more the Sangheili than the UNSC. So in the Kilo 5 trilogy, it's more of this peace is possible, but nobody believes it's going to happen. So the folks like Julim Dama and Kilo 5 and Perengoski are all pushing again back towards conflict and war. And I was kind of expecting that to kind of be the situation in Envoy, where there's this tenuous balance that will hopefully tip towards peace at the end. Instead, it starts off with violence already fully erupted. Like, we're dropped right in the middle of the war zone. And it was just kind of like a stressful read, like, from the get-go. But at the end, despite all the conflict, despite the fact that there was, you know, that the peace talks failed initially, the end still brought about reconciliation and forgiveness and an emphasis on a peaceful resolution. Like the very fact that Rajka he goes from a warrior, someone who's proud to be a warrior, to someone who's proud to be a diplomatic envoy, and I loved it.
I'd say my favorite part of the book was that it actually recanonized the Sharkoi, which had kind of been in a canonical limbo for like 11 or 12 freaking years.
Yes. And it made them terrifying.
And I think it also was a nice shading on just another aspect of the Forerunners you don't see, that, yeah, they kind of made these like terrible slave war monster things.
which 343 and Buckle really got close to the concept art that Bungie had established for the Sharkcore already with their descriptions and stuff.
Yeah, I noticed that too. That was a nice touch. I do know that a while back I was talking about conversations of the universe where the Sharkoi were mentioned, and Frankie mentioned that he had a hand in writing a lot of what was in there. So I imagine it was probably one of those personal things that he was interested in making sure.
Frankie kind of had his fingers in a lot of stuff like that.
With Defguru, you were the one who mentioned, who called the Sharkoi, or maybe it was you, David, like the kind of slave races that the Forerunners created. I think that's really interesting because I could be remembering this wrong, but either it was in the Forerunner trilogy or was in like a deleted scene from Halo 4, but like some of the races that we know now, weren't those kind of genetically engineered to be in servitude to the Forerunners as well? Am I remembering that right?
I do not actually remember off the top of my head.
I've forgotten more of the Forerunner saga than Greg Bear wrote.
Yeah, it's 2018 will be the year of rereading all that stuff for me. But I mean, even then you have the librarian dicking around with humans for funsies, so it's not really that far away from their usual operation.
Yeah. Okay. That was just kind of a side note that I cued in on.
I also appreciated that this is one of the few books where someone does the obvious proper response to something, which is shoot the leader from the distance. And this is just the one case it doesn't actually work. So they immediately decide, oh, that guy's controlling all the Sharkoi. Let's shoot him in the head. And if it weren't for the fact that the Forerunners had a really bad idea of making their tech apparently work for everybody who puts it on, that would have been the end of it.
They seemed really picky about which stuff they'd make only humans able to use.
Mm-hmm.
People were not... They had some plans going out to the Sharkoi factory, but no one missed the memo, and just...
Bad project management. Just bad project management overall.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure that most people, when they read the summary for Envoy before it came out, when it talked about some Forerunner secret being buried under the sand, I'm sure a lot of people assumed that was a Guardian. I was very pleasantly surprised that it was the Sharkoi for the reasons I've already mentioned.
Yeah, and I think, especially for me as someone who isn't a big fan of Buckles, I always terrible with that name, but just not a big fan of a lot of his Halo work, I think Envoy pleasantly surprised me because it did zag a lot more than I expected. I definitely liked it more than Cold Protocol. Definitely liked it more than Dirt.
I think I'm the opposite. I really liked Cold Protocol, and I liked Envoy, but I think it did some things in terms of pacing, especially in the later half, that kind of bogged down my overall enjoyment.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, between the two, I felt that the writing style that Buckle used between the two novels was different enough that I can't really compare them. Like, I felt like his writing style for Cold Protocol was more bombastic and delightfully over the top. Like, I mean, Fel takes on assassins naked and then goes in front of the elders naked to be like, yeah, what up, you can't touch this. And then Juliana... Yeah, and Juliana introduces herself as the goddess of the rebel. A Spartan gets into a bar fight. So, like, the Cold Protocol was delightfully kind of over the top in terms of action, whereas Envoy kind of felt more gritty and more introspective with the characters, especially with Grey Team working through what, they just essentially glassed a planet. And then and kind of working through what that meant for them, and Rajka's journey, and Melody's just kind of trying to work through this situation that she was barely trained for. So
yeah, I think for me, Grey Team didn't really have much distinguishing them in the Cole Protocol, and so I connected with them better here in Envoy, even if I don't think he totally landed with the, oh, we're all back together and we understand each other and we're all happy-go-lucky by the end.
I also think it's worth noting, I thought the antagonist of Envoy, Hakabe, was pretty good, especially for a brute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think maybe you can say the theme through 2017, if you're going to pick out a thread, good brute antagonists.
Yes.
So we get Hakabe, we get Atriox, and we also have the return of Castor, which I know you were excited about, Abby. I was listening to the last episode, and you're like, oh, I hope Castor comes back from Last Light. And he did. And he improbably survives yet again.
Yes! Yes! Thank you, 343.
Yeah, so it's possible he's still out there.
I was going to say, which one of these guys do you think gets killed in the opening cutscene of Halo 6?
Dural and Dama.
Actually, yeah, Duralda survives too. But we'll get to that.
I guess I've got one more thing, is that I liked the thematic touch of Thelvidom pardoning the Grey Team for their glassing of a Sangheili colony. Like, I thought that was... Like, I mean, on one hand, yeah, they both starred in the Cole Protocol. They were both major characters in the Cole Protocol, but also the whole thematic tie-in of, yeah, Thel's kind of glassed a lot of planets himself, and he's just kind of that perspective he has of, well, we did some bad things in war, so let's try to move forward.
Yeah, and I think well, and that was for the people who complained that like the Kilo 5 trilogy didn't have enough perspectives of people who were more sympathetic to Halsey. I think this book did a good job in presenting the human and the Covenant side. I think it's Melody who flat out like basically says bullshit to one of the righteous indignation of one of the elites. I'm like, do you remember what you guys did?
Yeah.
So that was pleasant.
I'm very much looking forward to what the end of the book hints at, of stories with Grey Team with this joint human elite task force that Osmond set up.
Me too.
Do you really want to talk about end of book setups that go to nowhere? Because I've got a list.
Hey, as long as I'm not dead, they're not going nowhere yet.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
They'll get there before you...
Well, and that's I guess alongside brute antagonists done well. I guess you could say the other big thing with 2017 was the follow-up of dangling plot threads, because we've still got the big hanging one of where the heck 343 Guilty Spark / Shakas and the Rubicon are. Mm-hmm. That's been going on for a while, but we got the follow-up to Grey Team, which was 6 years or so. Yeah, so almost the better part of a decade in the making.
Yeah.
We got a follow-up with Duralim Dama, which was from the Thursday War. We'll talk about later. Like a lot of, and then we got Halo Wars 2, which obviously followed up on 2009's Halo Wars. Yeah. So a bunch of footballs were kicked forward down the field. This year
showing us that 343 can do more than just kill Spartan 2s.
Yes, some can actually survive.
Yeah. Fascinating concept.
Okay. So in August, we get the follow-up to Halo Last Light, Halo Retribution, by Troy Denning. We talked about it was the return of Castor. He survives. Return of Blue Team. And this one, I think probably overall, this is my favorite novel of the year. It's kind of hard.
I'd say so.
I think the big thing you can say about all three novels that came out this year is that they all, I think, in their credit, even though they might all be varying degrees of successful, they were all trying to do different things. Envoys delving into the political landscape, and I think I know there are people, like I've seen on the Halo Archive and other places, that are really upset that after a giant war where people were killing each other by the millions, humans and Covenant factions just didn't get along, and they found that annoying. And so I thought Envoy was a good rebuttal to that. Like, yeah, they've got problems, and there are people who are not going to be interested in peace whatsoever, but there are people who are, and this is how the universe moves forward. So there was that going in all these books. But meanwhile, Retribution, well, sometimes the mystery stuff kind of delved into like CSI level nonsense. I appreciate that Veta Lopez is a different kind of character than we're used to following around. She does different things. The book is structured in a different way.
I think I gotta say, I think Beta Lopez is probably one of my favorite Halo characters, probably at this point.
Even without having finished Retribution, she is a fantastic character. I really appreciate how she, there is a very clear human trafficking issue with both the Spartan 2s and the Spartan 3s. And the Spartan 2s were addressed, that whole especially was addressed in Mortal Dictata, but Dictata, the third Kilo 5 book.
Yes.
But I like that Vita Lopez brought the attention to the human trafficking that was the Spartan program. Like, Spartan 3 program, and she tries to take the Gammas into protective custody. So I like that she's aware of that, and she's doing her best to kind of watch out for them, because they don't want to leave this, but she doesn't want to leave them in there alone. And so I really like that aspect of it.
And she's also got an interesting angle of being someone who's aware of how terrible the system and the UNSC can be, but also feeling that her best option is to work within the system. And that she has her own personal lines she won't cross.
I find it refreshing to have a character who's repeatedly not afraid to call Oni on bullshit.
Yes.
Someone's got to say it. Just saying what the fans are thinking. And then the other thing I really liked about Retribution was, I remember when the synopsis came out, I was really confused as to how this was going to make sense with the timeline of Halo 5 when you go to the Argent Moon and what the heck was going on there. And it actually adds a lot more to the story than we got in the game, which I quite enjoyed, and set up that, yes, the Intrepid Eye also, the year of returning and surviving antagonists. Intrepid Eye is still bouncing around, still doing her own weird version of the mantle where she's gotta make humanity better by possibly killing them all.
We have Ultron in Halo now.
Essentially.
There are no strings on her.
Yeah, and I liked, and I think it was also an interesting depiction, because usually you do have, like, when you have the AIs taking over, they are doing it in a bombastic way, like Cortana. Even if I am more a fan of the created story arc than many people, it's very much a here I am kind of story, whereas Intrepid Eye is all about doing things from the shadows, and if you've done something right, people won't know you've done anything at all, which I really enjoy.
I like the conversation she has with Rooker, where she's like, hey, can you do this for me? He's like, no, you're not allowed to do that. Like, I'm not doing it, you're doing it. Oh, I am doing it.
Yeah, and then I also really like that it shows ultimately, basically, that because no one ever goes back to read their own reports, Intrepid Eye gets away with it, because all it would take would be Osmond to reread something she wrote. I'm like, wait, I threatened to kill everybody there, and that's not what happened. And then the jig would be up. But
all of this could have been avoided if they hadn't hired the horniest Oni agent I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, and that was another bit that I really loved, is that we have generally, I would say the general rule is that UNSC is all filled with competent people, and they make a point of Intrepid Eye basically manipulates the UNSC and Oni to promoting the most idiotic guy they have possible so she can control him, which is great. I'm all for the dumb humans getting their comeuppance.
Yeah. I think the best thing I can say to praise this book is that this book introduces a human character, and Fred, the big Spartan 2 that we've known for years, and they start having a thing. And I should hate that more than anything in the entire world. And the fact that I don't means that it's good, in my opinion.
It's a fair point. So also in August was the first issue release of Rise of Atriox, the comic mini-series / kind of anthology series, because the writers and artists are different every single time, which I know annoys the heck out of some people, myself included.
Only when it's bad.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad per se. It's just a reality of comic production.
Yeah. I was not a fan of issue 1's art style. I've only read issues 2 and 3. My comic shop hasn't gotten issue 4 yet. But I think the art style in the other issues is better than the first one.
Yeah, there's stuff to be enjoyed about all of them, but it is inconsistent. And that with alongside the fact that it's not very much a linear story, but much more like vignettes set in Atriox's timeline make it feel a lot more like an anthology to me. But I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel like that vignette style has really worked in its favor. Because when Isabel talks about him in Halo Wars 2, she gives him this legendary status. And the vignettes kind of help reestablish that from a reader perspective. So we're coming in with kind of the same, we're getting the same perspective that other people have. Like the people in Universe have of him.
Yeah, and I think it'll all depend, my ultimate feelings on it will depend on how they stick the landing with the final issue that comes out next year. But I like that so far, if it doesn't land well, it'll seem like a terrible discontinuity. If it does, it'll feel like an excellent piece of character building, because the Atriox we see in Rise of Atriox is a lot more idealistic, I would say. A lot more quote-unquote pure of heart. That he, at one point, he has the ability to basically keep some drones enslaved, and he destroys the control device. And that's a pretty big difference from the guy who's kind of torturing Lacolo to put in his scarabs and has the engineers constantly chained up. So
that is a good point.
So it'll be interesting to see if they address that. And I hope they do, because it makes sense that over time, Atriox maybe got a little power hungry, got a little war weary.
I mean, a little bit, but in the first, the issue begins with him killing his engineer, either because he's a traitor or incompetent. And he never figures out which.
I mean, sometimes you just gotta tie up your loose ends and be done with it.
Well, I also think that like the punish, like I'm not saying that Atriox is a nice, friendly guy who I'd like to, grab a coffee with, but at the same time, punishing someone for incompetence or traitorous acts is a little different than enslavement. So I can see him being against enslavement, but still being willing to be this very brutal individual who will brook no.
Well, he's still a brute at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They've never talked about like brute slavery or anything, have they?
To my knowledge.
Now, other than the basic, like subjugation that they lived in under the Covenant, well, basic, it was.
Is the Covenant kind of slavery? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Poor guys.
Speaking of Atriox, I think the best characterization of him in the entire year was in the car sale ad, personally.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we brought up in our Halo Wars 2 review, is that a missed opportunity with Halo Wars 2 is that they didn't have a big interplay between Cutter and Atriox butting heads. They really only start talking in the second to last episode or mission.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like the car ads honestly had more personality interplay between them. So it's kind of a bummer we didn't get more of that in the games. It would have been fun.
I think they probably could have packed that into the 7 minutes of cutscenes that were not there compared to the first game.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, the whole marketing campaign for it was know your enemy. So I felt like there should have been a little more built.
We do in a roundabout way. Know your enemy asterisks. Look for the comic series tie-in.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Atriox, when he was announced, had a ton of potential. And Halo Wars 2 story put that potential on a shelf and says, we've still got that potential. We can get it anytime we want to. Not right now, but sometime.
Yeah, and that's why I think I know some people were upset that Awakening the Nightmare didn't end, I guess, more definitively. But I really liked that it showed us a different side of Atriox, where he's kind of, what's it like being manager Atriox, where you're trying to run this whole thing, and then wouldn't you know, your lieutenants unleashed a flood, and oh god, like, all right, he basically shows up to stare them down and say, you guys are cleaning up this mess.
That was good, yes.
I would love just the next comic series, just have it be about Pavium and Vortis getting into misadventures. That's all I need.
Yeah, they do seem like they would be good for your buddy comedy setup.
Especially since one of them is brother no and the other is brother yes.
Brother no, too late, already doing it.
And they're gonna introduce their third brother maybe.
So anything else about Retribution or Atriox? Okay, and then September, we got Awakening the Nightmare, which we've talked about a little bit, and we also got Halo Warfleet, which was the non-novel release.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I had too as well. It's something that took out. I enjoyed it, but it's one of those things where I couldn't actually buy a copy because I really get upset that they don't release their art books and / large format stuff digitally. And I don't have room in my house for more stuff. I eventually broke down and got Mythos, but that was it. I mean, it was definitely, I think I'm not the kind of fan this was targeted for. It was targeted for more of the Stephen Loftuses of the world who like the more nitty-gritty details about ships and the tech.
God bless that man, but I do not think of the Halo universe the way he does.
Well, that's why he's helping them write the books, because most people don't think the way he does.
It was actually, I can't remember which ship. One of them is credited as being created by Dr. Stephen Loftus in the in-universe.
Oh.
He gets his shout out as well-deserved as it is. And so I enjoyed Warfleet for what it is, but it definitely it seemed like it was targeted at people who were not me.
For the more hungry among us, though, I think the most interesting thing in the entire book was the galaxy map that it had, which showed us the location of all the Halos, along with three other quote-unquote threats that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, it did have some, for the lore people, it did have some little tidbits. There was lots of interesting stuff, little things in it. The one thing that I picked up on that was interesting was they talked about, they had more stuff about High Charity and how basically the center of it was like at some point they had lost contact with it. Like no one went in there. It was like this lost zone of the city, which was interesting. There's lots of little tidbits like that.
That lack of contact in the center, was that potentially a reference to when in Contact Harvest, Mendicant Bias decides, hey, I'm gonna light up this ship and go say hi to the humans, and then the folks who would be the R3 prophets in the games just shut it down? Is that the same center that they're talking about?
No, I think because that's on the Dreadnought where they're going.
Which, speaking of, Warfleet gave us the name of the Dreadnought.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's
what
true.
is it?
The Anodyne Spirit.
Yeah, so it had lots of little details like that that were still cool to know. Then, final thing we got this year was Halo Legacy of Onyx, our last podcast episode, and we had basically Danny for what he read. It's probably on the negative end, me in the middle, and then Heruspis on the positive side. And I believe that you were very much positive as well, Abby.
Yes, exceptionally positive. Mainly because, like, okay, to start off with, I acknowledge that there are some tropes that are definitely in young adult. Like, for example, the main thing that stood out to me was was when someone mentioned on Halo Archive, tacit axiom, I believe, kind of mentioned that, hey, you do realize that, these folks are discussing classified information without checking to make sure that Molly is really out of the room. And like that I will grant. Like that was a little.
Yeah, I think my remark on that in our episode was it's nice to know even 500 years in the future, the standard kid method of I'm going upstairs, I'm going to wait on the stairs and listen still works.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I acknowledge like that's a bit iffy. But in terms of like the other complaints that I've seen about like a Hergok shutting down a Guardian, to me it's I don't care. It's
Wait,
yeah. Yeah.
They've never done that
Yes.
before.
Never. I mean, it's like they would have been created by the Forerunners to do amazing things with their technology. Yeah, so like beyond that, it didn't bother me, and it was so much of what I had been wanting to see from a Halo novel or from just a science fiction novel in general since I got into Halo. I fully acknowledge that it might not be for everybody, but honestly, this book had everything that I liked, except for a fancy ball. Like honestly, if there had been a fancy ball, it would all my favorite tropes would have been in there: interspecies cooperation, female main character, themes about reconciliation and forgiveness, themes about family, alien characters, and like Gundam, I don't know how to pronounce the name. Little Angoy, she is adorable and I love her. So, yeah, I have a more comprehensive discussion of how I feel about the book on Halo Archive.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes so you can.
Yeah,
people
but
can read.
I have a very strong personal bias towards it because it felt like going back to my roots as a fan. So.
and I have not finished the book, but the first 50 pages, the thing I appreciated the most was that we finally got to see the Siege of Paris 4 and got a nice little cameo from Sergeant Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I did not finish this because I have been having a terrible streak with Halo physical media lately. I bought Halo Legacy of Onyx, and it was missing 30 pages from it. It jumped from 56 to 87. And I have not gotten the last 2 issues of Rise of Atriox because my local comic book shop, the guy who owns it, is going through a divorce, and his wife called and canceled all of his comic orders.
Wow.
That's been a
Oh my
thing.
gosh.
So that's playing dirty. Yeah, so that's just one more reason to go digital. Just do that and read it on my phone, because like a filthy peasant. The only annoying thing is I hate not having useful page numbers to when people are talking about things and citing stuff. It's especially annoying for Forward Unto Dawn articles that you don't actually have an option for a page number other people can easily replicate.
Yep.
But you avoid those issues.
I mean, like with Comixology, I don't know if what you're using, but at least for them, like comic books, you get pretty solid which pages are which.
Yeah, because
But
they
like,
just replicate them. Exactly.
Yeah. But if you're reading a novel online, like if you're trying to quote from a Kindle, good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Haruspis cites all this stuff to the Kindle ebook editions. It's like,
I've noticed that.
nice for trying, but less than helpful. So I think I definitely appreciate the. I mean, I don't think I wrote any terrible wish fulfillment fan fiction as a kid. I definitely like imagined it in my head. Um, and I think it's unfair to call Legacy of Onyx like fan fiction because it doesn't really feel like that, even if it embraces some of the same stuff. But I think it is a more juvenile story, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's kind of funny because Forbeck's last novel with New Blood, a lot of fans would consider the opposite of fan fiction.
Well, in fan fiction, you don't kill off the rookie. Like, you just don't do that. Um, whereas in this one, it's cathartic. If anyone ever had a high school bully, like in real life, your high school bully doesn't get killed by a murderous alien.
Yeah, but the thing is it wasn't painted as cathartic. It was painted as horrific. Like the murder of that kid.
Yeah,
That was
but
not a cathartic experience.
well, it wasn't. But on the other hand, he's also basically the only one who died. Like the elite, I forget the elite teacher's name. She survives a gut shot.
Yeah.
Like everyone else survives kind of implausible injuries, but the only one who gets killed is the bully.
I kind of feel like that was used in a way to contrast the difference between Bakar, assume, and Dural. Like, for instance, Dural is willing to pretty much kill his allies, whereas Bakar goes in and speaks up on behalf of his enemy, who gets killed. Anyways, but it definitely, I felt like the choice of having that kid die not only ups the stakes for everybody. Like, I genuinely thought after the kid died, that was kind of an anything goes moment for me. I genuinely thought Kasha died. I actually thought for a moment that they had killed off Tom, and I was like, they're gonna have you. The Phantom is gonna be outside your doorstep with like pitchforks, and for your own safety, please don't do that.
They barely survived them lying that Team Saber was dead for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so.
Or Black Team. There's still the people pouring it out for Black Team, and I just don't understand it. You were gonna kill off some Spartan 2s. Those were gonna be the ones to do.
Have you posted that comment to the Halo Story subreddit before?
That Black Team was the people to kill? I mean, yeah. If not, I would have heartily upvoted that sentiment.
Oh, man, you and I have got to have words.
It's funny. I'm not usually one of those people who gets upset with the like, oh, well, this character wouldn't do that. Like, they're like blah blah blah, perfect. But the whole backstory, I think, of Black Team, where the other Spartans like knocked out her eye and all this stuff, like that just seemed like such a weird departure from everything we know. It's always stuck in my craw as weird, and I think that soured me on everything else. I do give them props for coming up with a kind of goofy but still decent way to show identical Spartans in identical armor, but still disambiguate them with the Roman numerals on their faceplates before they just gave up on Spartans ever looking similar.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, visually, much more interesting.
Much more interesting. I just, it also annoys me. I'm not a huge Nyland guy, but still, like, the whole thing about, oh, they were all dressed in identical stuff, like, makes sense, especially when your armor is worth a battle group or whatever.
And also brand new. Like,
yeah.
You know, they don't have the Mjolnir armor. Like, this is completely off topic, and it's such a minor nitpick, but, like, I guess I would have preferred that Blue Team, instead of having a different armor beforehand during the Nyland era, so to speak, they rather got that new armor when they got out of the Shield world. But that's a minor nitpick.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in terms of what, kind of going back to your comment, David, about, Black Team's death didn't really bother you that much because that one piece of their backstory kind of got stuck with you, and you weren't that fond of it, and it kind of colored the rest of your view of them. The Legacy of Onyx actually was a bit of a test for me to see if I could handle the created influencing other stories, because I was and still am kind of one of the people who, I don't dislike the idea of the created, but I feel like the execution was very poor, including the execution of Cortana's character. But we've already had that discussion. So for me, going into Legacy of Onyx and having Cortana and the created be that kind of third act final boss, so to speak, Legacy of Onyx essentially got me to realize that yes, I can still enjoy books that deal with the fallout of Halo 5, the choices in the Halo 5 that I didn't appreciate. So I'm kind of glad that this was the test run for that, that a book that I loved had that in it, so I could really determine that, yes, I'm ready to continue on with this. I'm ready to see where 343 takes it, and hopefully that they will tell compelling stories with this twist. So.
Well, on that note, I guess the question is, looking to the future, what we think next year holds, because we've got, at this point, we've got a pretty light schedule, actually. I think we knew more last year about what was coming. We've got the final issue of Rise of Atriox in January, and then we have Bad Blood, Halo Bad Blood, coming in June.
By Taylor Swift.
Which I think is I feel like that's going to be the fastest turnaround for a book by the same author.
Is that Forbeck again?
Which is why it's kind of a surprising turnaround. Yeah, so I'm interested in seeing where that goes. I assume also it won't tie into Legacy of Onyx, partially because Legacy of Onyx does a good job of making sure that Trevelyan does not impact the created story, theoretically, going forward.
It really is a sequel to Ghost of Onyx.
And they did it without destroying a shield world.
Yeah, just shove it back in slit space, guys. Well, and this is good because Dani has ranted on many occasions on this podcast about how it's just a giant thing that you can't ignore, and especially with Cortana on the warpath, it would not be acceptable to ignore it. And so they've shunted it away because clearly I think they've got interesting things going on with it being basically the only place where humans and elites are actually getting along well. That's kind of this utopian research project, even though they've kind of got an angry Covenant faction in there with them now.
The solution does not please me in any way, by the way.
This shocks me. I am shocked.
Yeah. So, in addition to the things that you said are coming out next year, we're also getting the physical release of Halo Smoke and Shadow.
Oh yeah, that's
Really?
true.
Wait, did that come out this year?
No, that came out last year.
Man, my timeline is all screwed up.
Well, it's tough because all that they had at the end of 2015 and 2016, they put out all those short stories and digital novellas, and then some of them ended up in Fractures, some of them didn't, some have gotten follow-up novels, etc. It's a bit hard to keep track of. And yeah, which ones got real releases, or I shouldn't say real, physical releases versus digital releases.
No, you can say real.
To you, they're real, only when they hit the print, even if they're missing pages.
Okay, I can't say anything to that.
Yeah,
but at least I can rely on my Barnes & Noble to break street date.
That's true. You do. That is the advantage of physical. You can get games and stuff early if they mess up or don't care.
Because nobody cares about anything less than street dates on books.
This is true. Yeah.
That's how I got Hunters in the Dark early.
Yeah.
Walked in.
And I think the person who posted on Halo Archive got it early because of Broken Street Day too. So
yeah.
So Broken Street Dates, they're good for something. Physical still has its value. So I guess the question is, with relatively little on the horizon, where we think the fiction is going to go in 2018.
Well, I'm assuming we're gonna start hearing at least whispers of Halo 6.
It's got to be at E3, right?
Yeah. Well, we got to start hearing something.
It's only going to be a year late. That's all.
Well, no, it would be if it would depend. The Xbox president has said that he wants there to be a shorter turnaround between a game's announcement and a game's release. So, if on the off chance that's true, then if they announce it at E3 and pull a Fallout 4 and it's out this fall, then the game itself will be on time. Just the announcement will be late.
Yeah. The only
I don't believe that for a moment. Not for a moment, but okay.
it's hopeful thinking because we're hopeful. We want a new game.
Let me put it this way: if we don't get some Halo 6 news soon, the Halo subreddit might literally implode.
Yeah, the only thing that throws me about that is they could do a quick drop like that, but then they also said that everything's going to have betas. So I feel like they would want to hype up the beta more, unless it's one of those E3, here's the announcement. Oh, by the way, the beta is coming in 2 weeks or something.
That is a very good point.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it definitely seems light, but we'll see what is going to get announced.
I hope we see the start of another comic series.
I would look forward to that too. I feel like every comic series that we've got, if it hasn't been as strong as a whole, there have been high points in it, at least.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like Escalation had a lot of high points, actually, so, yeah.
And I think I enjoyed, if you're talking about stories taking place in the created Fallout, I think the strongest book, or the strongest story in Tales from Slipspace was, oh god, no, I can't even remember the name of it. Where is it?
Was it the one about the ship?
Yeah, the one with the ship.
Yeah, that one was pretty dang strong.
I thought that one was weaker personally, but I wasn't too hot on a lot of Tales from Subspace's stories.
Another story I'd like to see followed up is the I don't remember the name, but it was Fractures, and it was the one that followed up on some folks trapped on Meridian after the Guardian launched. And essentially, in order to save their people, like the last survivors, they pledge allegiance to the created. I thought that would be an interesting follow-up, and I especially liked...
is the story.
Thank you. Yeah. I really like that story because that story actually felt a lot like the Galileo 7 from the Star Trek original series. Like, there were a lot of similar beats.
There's no monsters trying to eat them, though.
No, but they're, running a little... There's still the ticking clock and what to do with people who are dying and dead and stuff like that, so... measures of desperation, that sort of thing.
Actually, so I'm looking over the helpful 2017 Halopedia timeline, and among the tiny things that did not get mentioned, but I feel like are kind of funny to mention, is they had Halo Recruit come out, which is basically just a VR Halo demo.
Has anybody here gotten to try that?
No, I have not. You could go to Microsoft stores and try it, but I didn't get around to it.
I went to one of the tournaments when the Xbox One X came out, and I got to try it there. It was pretty interesting, but it was.
I mean, yeah, it's just a taste of something. I don't think they're really going to step into VR stuff anytime soon, but I could be wrong.
VR has to get out of the niche it's in first.
Yeah, and then the most important thing, I can't believe we missed it. October 11th, Halo, the adult coloring book, was released by Dark Horse Books.
Oh my gosh!
Which I do not believe I actually heard about this until I literally looked at this. So that's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw some folks, including Grim, of course, posting about it on Twitter.
The Halo coloring book actually provides some context for what happened to the Didact after Escalation.
Oh, right.
I heard about the stupid
Yes,
book.
that's right.
Oh.
Man, talk about having to go to, like, the most obscure places for bits of lore. Wasn't that an issue with, like, people having to, like, find out the names of people by buying, like, action figures?
Well, yeah,
that
was where the
heretic leader.
Yeah, Cessa Refume.
Yeah, Cessa Refume.
And the Prophet of Mercy. We knew his name for years before we found out Truth and Regrets.
Yeah. It's just one of those were the Halo 2 era sort of enjoy ride action figures.
You know, I actually, ironically, I don't remember the Prophet of Mercy's name. I remember the Prophet of Truth because it reminds me of Fidel Castro, Ord
Ord.
Castro. And then with with regret, his second name is like one O off from moron, so Lord Moron. So
The Prophet of Mercy's name is Hod Rumpt. And yes, it sounds like
Hard rumped? Really?
a Hod Rumpt, Rumnt. I think it's because he's the prophet that most resembles a butt.
well, the other two are just asses.
Yeah.
They're metaphorical asses, not literal
Yeah.
ones. Yeah, I can see where people are upset about the Halo coloring book thing. On the other hand,
I think it's just a tease of something that we're going to get at some point anyway, personally.
you think the Dynac's going to come back?
Yeah, totally. Like, I know he was sidelined for Halo 5, but I can't imagine 343's given up on him completely.
Yeah, like it
Sure, there's
seems
some
like
left
they.
of 'em in that barrel at the bottom.
I'm sorry, what?
Nothing? Nothing.
Okay, well, I'll listen to it later.
And then type back in the comments, I heard what you said, Danny.
I heard.
Here's my response.
So, in addition to stuff that you're saying that we looked over, I know we talked about Awakening the Nightmare, but Halo Wars 2 had quite a bit of DLC in terms of leaders and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Including the small and probably forgettable Operation Spearbreaker, which had almost no story to speak of, but I thought was at least a fun couple of levels to play.
Yeah, it was, from a gameplay standpoint, I think the DLC was definitely better than the base game, because the base game, unfortunately, it just seemed like mostly they stuck things in multiplayer scenarios so people could figure out multiplayer stuff, but it wasn't as enjoyably varied. And Spearbreaker and Waking the Nightmare had a lot more differences in mission objectives and stuff.
Yeah. But as far as leaders go, lore-wise, they're not too much, but I know Kinsano provided some interesting... I think it'd be cool to get a book for her.
Yeah.
As far as Colony goes, it's just cool that we've got a hunter character. And then...
That's basically a first. I mean, I'm trying to remember, they had
a Gito Nozohuru, and Ogata Nozofasu in the Flood, and Peruta Zeta Kana, and Waruna Zeta Yatno in Ghost of Onyx. And yes, I am a huge nerd.
Man,
I just want to say
instant recall.
thank you for remembering the hunters in the Flood. Just thank you.
Because
Thank
they're
you.
the only ones I think we've gotten a point of view from.
Yeah.
Right? 'Cause
Yeah.
If any women are listening, believe it or not, I'm single.
You can recall all the small minor characters in the Flood.
And then we can...
If that isn't the first line in your dating profile, you're doing something wrong.
then I must be doing something wrong.
Also, I appreciated that part. And I will forever hold the torch for the Flood as unjustly maligned. But
Thank you.
making me
Thank
feel
you.
bad about the hunters I just brutally kill in that first game was an accomplishment. Like, aw.
I will hold a torch for the non-Master Chief parts of the book.
Yes.
Yeah, if you could probably cut 50 pages of it that was all just regurgitating battle scenes that we had played with in the original game. It would have been great.
The most infuriating part of that was one part where he was going through the canyons to deactivate the pulse generators, and he killed some Flood, and he's like, oh, a rocket launcher. I'll store this in the cave if I need it. And for like 3 more pages, he advances forward. He's like, oh, I need to go get that rocket launcher. And then he goes back, and then he comes back.
Yeah, there were certain parts that were like added a little more of flavor to the to the chief things, like when he finds the one Marine in the library and kind of gives him a little eulogy.
Oh, yeah.
Marvin Mabuto.
Yep. Yeah. God bless you.
Were you quoting the novel, or were you reading verbatim from it?
I am going from my beautiful memory.
It sounds like you just lifted a chapter out of the book itself.
He can don't press him. He might actually be able to recall it if you give him the chance. He'll be able to recall exactly those 3 pages where he went back for the rocket launcher.
Yeah.
I will always remember you, page 397.
And I think I'm sad because as as great as some of the Flood stuff we've gotten in later books is, the bit about where they basically just go down to find the Flood underneath Alpha Base, and they realize that they've almost chewed their way through, and then the fight that goes on there, I think is great. And I would really love to see that, visualize that sort of aspect of the Flood.
That book did have really good action sequences. I'll give it that.
Yeah, Dietz did a really good job of defining like both the stakes and the strategy of the action sequences when he wasn't just pacing through the levels. Yeah.
And the Flood gave us our first Covenant perspective ever.
Yep, that's also true.
Yeah, I really credit actually Zuka, Yayap, and then Melissa McKay, who I will flat out argue is the protagonist of that book. Those three guys were the reason I got into Halo in the first place. Like, the Flood was my first introduction to Halo. Those three characters made me, get through the book, made me love the book, and then from there I read the rest of the novels, so yeah.
Okay, well, that wraps up this episode of the Forward to Dawn podcast. Thanks to our guests for joining us.
You're welcome.
Leave that pregnant pause in. All right. You can check out the show notes for this episode at forwardtodawn.com/FUDcast25. While you're there, you can check out old episodes or articles on the site, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, or follow us on Twitter and YouTube using the handle ForwardDawn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the new year.
It looks like Halo Wars 2 really did the worm.
All right, I'm cutting that out.
No, leave that in.
I would not blame you in the slightest.